There is a secret so powerful that the moment you say it out loud to the wrong person, it starts to lose its strength. Not because the dream isn't real and not because you aren't capable, but because some things are meant to be built before they are spoken. This secret isn't about hiding out of fear. It's about protecting something that is still becoming. The world teaches you to announce your intentions, to share your plans, to say what you're going to do so people can see you as ambitious, driven, inspired. But what the world doesn't tell you is that the moment you speak too soon, you invite interference. You invite opinions that were never asked for. You invite doubt disguised as advice. You invite other people's fears to sit in your mind and start negotiating with your confidence. When you tell someone your plan, they don't hear possibility the way you do. They hear risk. They hear uncertainty. They hear a reminder of something they once wanted but never finished. So they respond from that place. They call it being realistic. Running through, they call it caring. But what they're really doing is handing you their fear and asking you to carry it for them. And the dangerous part is that you usually accept it without realizing it. Suddenly, what felt exciting now feels heavy. What felt clear now feels complicated. You start explaining instead of executing. You start defending instead of building. You start adjusting your dream so it sounds more reasonable, more acceptable, more understandable to people who aren't living your life. Running through the park. There's another cost that no one warns you about. When you talk about what you're going to do, your brain rewards you as if you've already done it. You feel productive without producing anything. You feel accomplished without taking a step. That emotional reward steals the urgency you need to actually move. The fire that was supposed to push you forward gets burned up in conversation. So you stall, not because you're lazy, not because you don't want it badly enough, but because your mind thinks the work has already begun when it hasn't. Silence doesn't give you that false reward. Silence keeps the tension alive. It keeps the gap between where you are and where you want to be uncomfortable. And that discomfort is useful. It forces action. It forces discipline. It forces you to show up when motivation fades, because there's no applause coming to save you. There is a strength that only grows in private. It's the strength of keeping a promise to yourself that no one else knows about. It's the discipline of working when no one is watching. It's the confidence that comes from evidence instead of encouragement. Running through the park. That kind of strength can't be borrowed. It can't be talked into existence. It has to be built. Not everyone deserves access to what you're becoming. Some people only know how to support the version of you they're familiar with. Growth threatens comfort. Change disrupts dynamics. Even people who love you can unconsciously try to keep you small simply because small feels predictable. So they question your timing. They question your ability. They question your decision. And every question plants a seed. One seed turns into hesitation. Hesitation turns into delay. Delay turns into regret. This is why the most powerful moves are often invisible. The strongest people in the room usually aren't the loudest. Running through the park, they're the ones doing the work quietly while everyone else is talking about what they're going to do someday. When you move in silence, you stop performing. You stop performing, you stop seeking validation. You stop needing permission. Your energy becomes concentrated instead of scattered. You make decisions faster because you're no longer managing reactions. You adjust without embarrassment. You fail without an audience. And you learn faster because nothing is being filtered through pride or explanation. There will be a time to speak. There will be a time to share. But that time comes after the work has weight, after the dream has structure, after results exist. Until then, your silence is not secrecy. It's strategy. Because Once something is real, it doesn't need defending. It doesn't need convincing. It doesn't need permission. It walks into the room and changes the conversation. The secret isn't that you have to hide forever. The secret is knowing that your future doesn't need a witness. While it's still under construction, not everyone deserves access to your dreams, and that idea can feel uncomfortable because we're taught that sharing is healthy. Openness builds connection, that the people around us should automatically be trusted with our hopes. But dreams are not casual thoughts. They are fragile, unfinished versions of your future. And before they are strong enough to stand on their own, they need protection more than exposure. When you share them too early, you expose them to forces that can weaken them before they ever have a chance to grow. A dream, at its earliest stage, is raw energy. It's excitement mixed with fear, possibility mixed with uncertainty. You don't yet have proof. You don't yet have results. What you have is belief. And belief is incredibly powerful, but it's also incredibly sensitive. The wrong reaction, the wrong comment, the wrong facial expression can introduce doubt where there was once clarity. That doubt doesn't always sound harsh or cruel. Often it sounds reasonable. It sounds like concern. It sounds like advice. And that's what makes it dangerous. When you tell someone about your dream, they don't hear it as you do. They hear it through the filter of their own experiences, failures, insecurities, and limits. If they've never taken a risk like the one you're describing, their mind immediately searches for reasons it might not work. If they once tried something similar and failed, they project that outcome onto you. If your growth threatens their comfort, even subconsciously, they may try to pull you back to a level where they feel safe. None of this requires bad intentions. It happens automatically. There is also the subtle shift that happens inside you the moment you start talking instead of doing. Speaking about a dream creates a sense of progress that isn't real. Your brain rewards you as if you've already taken action. You feel productive just by explaining the plan. You feel accomplished just by being seen as someone with ambition. Feeling can replace the harder, lonelier work of actually executing. Suddenly, the urgency fades. The fire cools. The dream becomes a story you tell instead of a reality you build. Privacy, on the other hand, creates pressure in the right direction. When no one knows what you're working toward, there's no applause, no validation, no external reassurance. All you have is your commitment. That forces you to develop discipline. It forces you to follow through even when motivation disappears. Silence keeps the dream alive by keeping it unfinished, unresolved, demanding effort rather than attention. Another truth that's difficult to accept is that access to your dreams is a form of intimacy. It's not something everyone earns by default. Just because someone is close to you socially doesn't mean they are safe for your vision. Some people are good companions, but poor witnesses to your growth. They may support you emotionally, but struggle to support you evolutionarily. They like the version of you they already know. Your dream represents change, and change can destabilize relationships, even loving ones. There is also a power imbalance that happens when too many people know what you want before you achieve it. Their expectations start to weigh on you. Their questions start to interrupt your focus. You begin to perform the dream instead of pursuing it. You start adjusting the goal so it sounds more acceptable, more impressive, more understandable. Little by little, the dream shifts shape to fit the room instead of fitting your soul. Keeping a dream private doesn't mean you're afraid or ashamed. It means you're strategic. It means you understand that timing matters. There will be a moment when sharing is useful, when feedback is necessary, when collaboration strengthens the vision. But that moment should come after the dream has structure, after you've taken steps, after you've proven to yourself that it's not just an idea, but a direction. Until then, secrecy isn't weakness, it's protection. There's also a deeper reason silence matters. When you don't announce your plans, you remove the safety net of being perceived as someone who is going to do something. You either do it or you don't. There's nowhere to hide, no identity built on intention alone. That pressure sharpens you. It makes your relationship with yourself more honest. You stop negotiating with your excuses because no one else is watching. Not everyone deserves access because not everyone will handle that access with care. Some people will unintentionally plant fear. Some will measure your dream against their definition of success. Some will remember what you said months ago and use it to judge where you are now. Even supportive people can create noise. Noise is deadly to focus. Dreams need space. They need quiet. They need repetition without commentary. When you protect your dream, you give it room to mature. You allow yourself to fail privately, adjust quietly, learn without embarrassment. You build confidence not from praise but from progress. And when the dream finally becomes visible, when it has results behind it, it no longer needs defending. It no longer needs explaining. At that point, other people's opinions lose their power because the dream is no longer fragile. Choosing not to share everything is an act of self-respect. It's understanding that your inner world is not public property. Your ambitions are not the entertainment. Your future is not a group discussion. Some things grow best in the dark, away from constant observation, where they can develop roots before they face the light. Validation feels good, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. It gives you a rush that feels like progress, even when nothing has actually moved. A nod of approval, a compliment, a like, a word of encouragement can trigger the same internal reward systems as real effort. Your brain doesn't always know the difference between being praised for intention and being rewarded for action. That confusion is where momentum quietly dies. Momentum is built through movement, not recognition. It grows when you take small, often invisible steps day after day, especially when no one is watching. Validation interrupts that process by shifting your focus outward. Instead of asking, "What's the next step?" you start asking, "How does this look?" The work becomes performative. Progress becomes something you announce instead of something you earn. And the moment your energy is directed toward being seen, it's no longer fully available for doing. When you seek validation, you hand over control of your motivation. You allow other people's reactions to determine how you feel about your effort. If they're impressed, you feel energized. If they're indifferent, you feel deflated. That emotional dependence creates inconsistency. Momentum requires steadiness, requires showing up regardless of applause. When your drive is tied to external approval, it rises and falls with other people's attention, which is unpredictable and often fleeting. There's also a subtle shift in standards when validation becomes the goal. You begin optimizing for praise rather than progress. You choose actions that are easy to explain instead of actions that are effective. You prioritize visible wins over meaningful ones. Hard, unglamorous work gets postponed because it doesn't produce immediate recognition. Over time, this trains you to avoid the very tasks that would create real momentum. Validation also encourages premature celebration. You talk about what you're going to do, people respond positively, and your nervous system relaxes. The urgency fades. The discomfort that drives action disappears. Without discomfort, there is no pressure to move. The plan remains intact in your mind. The execution stalls. What started as motivation turns into a false sense of completion. Another cost of validation is that it crowds out self-trust. Instead of developing an internal compass, you start checking in with others before making decisions. You look for reassurance that you're on the right path. Constant checking creates hesitation. Momentum depends on decisiveness. Even imperfect action builds speed, but hesitation fractures it. When you rely on validation, you delay action while waiting for permission, agreement, or confirmation. There is also the emotional toll of inconsistency in feedback. Some days you receive encouragement, other days silence. The silence can feel like failure, even when you're doing the same work. That misinterpretation drains energy. You spend time managing emotions instead of building momentum. You question yourself unnecessarily. You start adjusting your pace or direction to provoke a response instead of staying aligned with your original intention. Validation can even distort your relationship with success. You begin to measure progress by how impressed others seem rather than by how much stronger, more skilled, or more disciplined you are becoming. This shifts your attention away from mastery and toward image. Momentum thrives on mastery. It feeds on the satisfaction of improvement, not the approval of observers. When image takes priority, momentum becomes fragile because it's built on perception rather than substance. The most dangerous form of validation is the kind that comes from people who care about you. Their approval feels especially important, which makes their doubt especially powerful. A raised eyebrow, a cautious comment, a lukewarm response can slow you down more than outright criticism. You start second-guessing choices that felt clear before you shared them. The internal dialogue that once pushed you forward becomes crowded with other people's voices. Momentum requires a certain level of emotional isolation, not loneliness but insulation. It requires the ability to keep moving even when no one understands what you're doing or why it matters. It requires tolerance for being unimpressive in the short term. Validation undermines that tolerance by making you crave affirmation instead of progress. The craving becomes a distraction, pulling your attention away from the work and toward the reaction. When you stop seeking validation, something shifts. Your energy returns inward. You start measuring success by consistency instead of compliments. You become less reactive and more focused. Decisions happen faster because they're no longer filtered through the question of how they'll be received. Internal alignment creates a steady compounding force. Each action makes the next one easier. Each day of follow-through strengthens the habit of movement. The absence of validation can feel uncomfortable at first. There is a quiet that replaces the noise of feedback. But in that quiet, clarity emerges. You become more aware of what actually matters. You notice the satisfaction of progress that doesn't need an audience. You build a relationship with your work that is based on respect rather than reward. Momentum thrives in environments where effort is private and standards are personal. It grows when the only person you're trying to prove something to is yourself. Validation pulls you outward, fragments your focus, and rewards you too early. When you let go of the need to be seen, you give your energy back to the process, and the process is where momentum is born. Silence has a reputation for being passive, as if nothing is happening when words are absent. In reality, silence is where the hardest work takes place. Talk is visible and immediate. It creates the illusion of movement because it's heard, noticed, and responded to. Silence, on the other hand, hides effort. It removes witnesses, and that removal forces strength to develop internally instead of being borrowed from reactions, praise, or attention. When you talk about what you're doing, you invite feedback before you've built resilience. Opinions arrive early before your foundation is solid. Even supportive words can weaken resolve by making you dependent on encouragement. Silence eliminates that dependency. It creates a closed system where you must rely on your own standards, your own discipline, your own reasons for continuing. That reliance is what strength actually is. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's formed in repetition, in showing up when no one is watching, in doing the same unremarkable actions over and over without applause. Silence protects that process. It allows you to struggle privately, to fail without explanation, to adapt without judgment. Turns every misstep into a performance. Silence turns missteps into lessons. There is also a psychological shift that happens when you keep your work to yourself. You stop managing impressions. You stop explaining delays. You stop defending choices. All of that mental energy returns to the task. Focus deepens because there's nothing to maintain except progress. Grows in that depth, in the uninterrupted attention that silence makes possible. Talking too much creates pressure of a specific kind. Creates pressure to be consistent with your words even when your understanding evolves. You feel trapped by what you've already said. Silence keeps you flexible. It allows you to change direction without feeling like you owe anyone a justification. That flexibility makes you stronger because it keeps you aligned with reality instead of with past declarations. Silence also sharpens self-awareness. When you're not narrating your journey, you hear yourself more clearly. You notice resistance instead of masking it with explanation. Running through the park. You feel doubt without immediately trying to resolve it through reassurance from others. Sitting with that discomfort builds emotional strength. You learn that you can survive uncertainty without outsourcing your confidence. Talk often invites comparison. The moment you share your plans or progress, you start measuring yourself against responses and against others who are doing something similar. Comparison fractures focus and drains energy. Silence removes the scoreboard. It returns you to your own pace, your own process. Strength grows when you stop rushing to match external timelines and instead commit to steady, sustainable effort. There's also a strategic advantage to silence. When people don't know what you're working on, they don't project expectations onto you. You're free from their timelines, their assumptions, their interpretations of success or failure. That freedom allows you to take risks quietly, test ideas without public consequence. Each risk taken without an audience strengthens confidence because the outcome, good or bad, is yours alone to process. Silence forces action to become the primary form of expression. Instead of explaining who you are becoming, you focus on becoming it. Instead of describing your discipline, you practice it. Over time, this creates a gap between who you used to be and who you are now. A gap built entirely through action. That kind of change doesn't need to be defended or justified. It carries its own weight. There is a difference between being silent and being inactive. Silence is often full of effort. It's early mornings, late nights, repeated attempts, quiet persistence. Talk is easy in comparison. It costs little to speak about intention. It costs everything to follow through without witnesses. The cost is what makes the strength real. Silence also builds patience. Without constant updates or external milestones, you learn to tolerate slow progress. You stop expecting immediate results because there's no audience demanding them. Patience strengthens endurance. Endurance strengthens capacity. Over time, what once felt heavy becomes manageable, and what once felt impossible becomes routine. When you operate in silence, you also develop a deeper sense of self-trust. You stop relying on reactions to tell you whether you're on the right path. You begin to notice internal signals instead. Fatigue becomes information, not failure. Resistance becomes something to work through, not something to announce. This internal calibration makes you stronger because it's portable. It doesn't disappear when people leave or opinions change. Silence builds a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need reinforcement. It's not performative or fragile. It's rooted in evidence you've accumulated privately. Every time you keep going without telling anyone, you prove to yourself that you can be relied on. That proof compounds. Strength grows faster in that environment because nothing interrupts it, dilutes it, or diverts it into explanation. Talk spreads energy outward. Silence concentrates it. Concentrated energy creates force. Force creates momentum. And momentum, when sustained without distraction, reshapes capability from the inside out. When you speak about your dreams, you assume people are hearing possibility, excitement, and potential. But most of the time, they are not hearing what you mean at all. They are hearing your words through the filter of their own fears. Filter is shaped by what they tried and failed at, what they never had the courage to attempt, what disappointed them, and what they learned to avoid in order to feel safe. So when you share a dream, you are not just sharing an idea. You are inviting their personal history into the conversation. Fear changes how people interpret ambition. What sounds like opportunity to you can sound like danger to someone else. What feels energizing to you can feel irresponsible or unrealistic to them. Their response often has less to do with your dream and more to do with the stories they tell themselves about risk, failure, and survival. They might call it being practical. They might call it being honest. But underneath that language is fear trying to protect itself. This is why advice is rarely neutral. When someone reacts cautiously to your dream, they are usually responding to the emotional memory of their own disappointment. If they once invested time, money, or hope into something that didn't work, your dream reminds them of that pain. Their nervous system responds before their logic does. They want to spare you the discomfort they experienced, but in doing so, they project their limits onto your future. Even encouragement can be filtered through fear. Some people support you in ways that subtly shrink the dream. They suggest a smaller version, a safer version, a more acceptable version. They say things like start slow, don't expect too much, have a backup plan. On the surface, it sounds caring, but embedded in those suggestions is an assumption that the dream is unlikely to work. The fear isn't yours, but it becomes something you have to manage once it's been introduced. People also hear dreams through the fear of comparison. Your ambition can highlight what they are not doing with their own lives. That contrast can be uncomfortable. Instead of confronting that discomfort, they unconsciously try to reduce the gap. They question the feasibility of your dream. They emphasize obstacles. They remind you of responsibilities. All of this serves to bring your aspiration closer to their level of comfort. There is also the fear of change. Your dream implies movement, growth, and transformation. Change can threaten the stability of relationships. If you succeed, you may outgrow shared routines or roles. If you fail, may disrupt expectations. Either outcome introduces uncertainty. People who value predictability often respond to that uncertainty by discouraging the very thing that creates it. The most confusing reactions often come from people who genuinely care about you. Their love makes their fear louder, not quieter. They imagine worst-case scenarios because they don't want to see you hurt. They ask questions that sound like concern but feel like doubt. They focus on what could go wrong instead of what could go right. Over time, those questions can erode your confidence if you're not aware of where they're coming from. Fear also narrows perception. When someone is afraid, they focus on risk and ignore opportunity. They see obstacles more clearly than pathways. When you talk about your dream, they respond with logistics, costs, timelines, and limitations. They rarely respond with curiosity or possibility. This imbalance can make you feel naive for believing in something that feels obvious to you. Running through the park, if you're not careful, you begin to internalize their fear. You start repeating their concerns in your own mind. You hesitate where you once felt certain. You dilute your ambition to make it more acceptable. This is how dreams quietly shrink, not because they were impossible, but because they were exposed too early to people who couldn't see past their own fear. Understanding this dynamic changes how you share. It teaches you to be selective. Not everyone needs to know what you're building. Not everyone is equipped to hold that information without distorting it. Some people are safe listeners, running through the park. They ask questions that expand your thinking instead of closing it down. They acknowledge risk without letting it dominate the conversation. They are rare. There is also freedom in realizing that negative reactions are not verdicts. They are reflections. When someone doubts your dream, they are revealing their own relationship with fear. That realization helps you detach emotionally. You stop taking resistance personally. You stop arguing or defending. You conserve energy for action instead of explanation. Dreams require a certain level of insulation in their early stages. They need time to develop structure, evidence, and resilience. When you protect them from fear-based interpretation, you give yourself the space to build confidence through action rather than reassurance. Confidence built this way is stronger because it's grounded in experience, not approval. The goal is not to avoid all feedback, to understand its source. Fear-based feedback tends to focus on what might be lost. Vision-based feedback focuses on what might be created. Learning to tell the difference allows you to listen without absorbing. You can hear concern without letting it become doubt. You can acknowledge fear without allowing it to define your path. When you recognize that people hear through their fears, you stop expecting them to validate your vision. You stop trying to convince them. You accept that clarity is not contagious and courage cannot be transferred through conversation. It must be built internally through action, repetition, and persistence away from the noise of other people's unresolved fears. Your brain is wired to reward intention almost as generously as action, and that wiring creates a dangerous illusion. Running through the park, when you talk about what you're going to do, your brain often treats that declaration as if progress has already been made. Chemicals associated with achievement and satisfaction are released simply because you articulated a plan. On a biological level, your mind registers movement, even though nothing has actually changed in the real world. This is why talking about goals can feel so motivating at first. You feel energized, focused, optimistic. You experience a sense of identity shift as if you've already stepped into the person who achieves the thing. But that feeling is borrowed. It's not backed by effort or repetition. It fades quickly because it was never anchored to behavior. The problem begins when that borrowed feeling replaces the drive to act. Once your brain receives a reward, it naturally reduces urgency. The discomfort that pushes you to work lessens. What once felt necessary now feels optional. You still want the outcome. The internal pressure to move toward it weakens. This is how intention turns into delay without you consciously choosing it. Talking also creates a false sense of accountability. When you tell others what you plan to do, it feels like a commitment. You assume that saying it out loud will force you to follow through. But in many cases, the opposite happens. The social acknowledgement satisfies the need for progress. Instead of holding you accountable, it lets you feel complete without completing anything. Your brain is not designed to distinguish between symbolic progress and real progress unless consequences are present. Words are symbols. They represent action without requiring it. When you repeatedly talk about goals without pairing that talk with immediate effort, your brain learns that expression is enough. Over time, This weakens the association between desire and discipline. There is also an attention cost. Talking about your plans pulls focus away from execution. You start refining explanations instead of refining skills. You rehearse conversations instead of rehearsing actions. Mental energy is limited. Every ounce spent on articulation is energy not spent on practice. This fragmentation slows momentum and increases the likelihood of stalling. Another subtle effect is that talking locks you into a narrative before you've tested reality. You become attached to the story of what you're going to do. When obstacles appear, instead of adjusting quietly, you feel pressure to maintain consistency with what you've said. This can create paralysis. You hesitate to act because action might expose gaps between the story and your current capability. Talking also increases emotional exposure. Once people know your plans, their reactions begin to matter. Praise feels encouraging, but can be distracting. Criticism feels discouraging and can trigger self-doubt. Either way, your emotional state becomes reactive. Reactivity disrupts focus. Focus is required for doing. There is a difference between clarity and communication. Clarity is internal. Communication is external. You can have deep clarity without saying a word, but once you start communicating before clarity has matured, you invite noise. Noise competes with your own thinking. It introduces alternatives, concerns, and interpretations that may not be relevant at the stage you're in. Your brain also learns patterns quickly. If it notices that talking about goals leads to positive social feedback, it will seek that shortcut again. Instead of working, you talk. Instead of practicing, you plan out loud. This creates a loop where expression becomes a substitute for execution. The loop feels productive but produces nothing. Silence, in contrast, keeps the brain slightly uncomfortable. Without verbal release, tension of the unfinished task remains. That tension is useful. It pushes you toward action because there is no other way to relieve it. When you work in silence, the only reward comes after effort, not before it. Doing creates feedback that talking never can. Action reveals what works and what doesn't. It provides information that refines the next step. Talking keeps everything theoretical. Brain prefers theory because it's safe. Action introduces risk, effort, and potential failure. When talking satisfies the brain's need for reward, it naturally avoids the harder option. There is also an identity trap. When you talk about what you're going to do, people begin to see you as that person. You adopt the identity before earning it. This can reduce urgency because the social identity feels secure. You are seen as ambitious, disciplined, creative, driven. But identity without behavior is unstable. Eventually, the gap between who you say you are and what you do creates internal friction. The brain seeks efficiency. If it learns that words produce the same emotional payoff as work, it will choose words. This is not laziness. It's conditioning. The way to break that conditioning is to delay expression until after action. Let effort come first. Let reward follow. When you reduce talking and increase doing, the brain recalibrates. It starts associating satisfaction with completion instead of declaration. Motivation becomes steadier because it's reinforced by real outcomes. Confidence grows because it's based on evidence rather than intention. Understanding that your brain confuses talking with doing allows you to use that knowledge strategically. You stop announcing plans and start creating proof. You let the discomfort of silence drive movement. You allow action to become the primary language through which progress is expressed. Announcements are easy. They cost nothing but words and confidence is cheap when it hasn't been tested. You can announce intentions without risk, without resistance, without effort. Results are different. Results require time, discomfort, repetition, and the willingness to keep going when no one is impressed. That difference is why results carry weight and announcements fade quickly. When you announce something, you control the narrative. You choose the language, the tone, the framing. You present the best version of the idea without having to confront reality. Results remove that control. They stand on their own. They don't need explanation or justification. They either exist or they don't, and that clarity is what makes them powerful. Announcements seek attention before substance exists. Results attract attention because substance has already been built. This shift changes how people respond. Announcements invite opinions. Results invite recognition. Opinions are loud, inconsistent, and often unhelpful. Recognition is quieter and rooted in evidence. One creates noise. The other creates credibility. There is also an internal difference. When you announce plans, your focus often shifts to maintaining the image you've created. You start thinking about how it looks instead of how it works. Results pull focus in the opposite direction. They force you to engage with reality, with constraints, with feedback that can't be ignored. Engagement sharpens skill and judgment in ways talk never can. Announcements can create pressure that is disconnected from progress. You feel watched before you've built capacity. That pressure can lead to rushing, cutting corners, or choosing safer paths just to avoid embarrassment. Results-based work moves at a pace determined by learning, not by optics. It allows you to be slow when slowness is required and aggressive when momentum builds. People often believe that announcing goals will create accountability, but accountability without action is fragile. It depends on memory, attention, and interest from others. Results create automatic accountability. They reflect exactly how much work has been done. There is no need for reminders or explanations. The evidence speaks continuously. Another limitation of announcements is that they freeze intention in time. You declare a direction before fully understanding the terrain. As you move forward, you learn, you adjust, you refine, but public declarations can make adjustment feel like failure instead of evolution. Results allow flexibility. They reflect where you are now, not what you once said you would do. Results also protect energy. When you stop announcing, you stop defending. You stop answering questions. You stop managing expectations. Energy can be redirected into focus and execution. Over time, this creates a compounding effect. Each completed step strengthens confidence and capability, making the next step more efficient. There is a difference in how trust is built. Announcements ask people to believe you. Results give them something to see. Belief requires persuasion. Seeing requires nothing. This is why results carry authority. They remove the need for convincing. They shorten conversations. They end debates. Internally, results create a different kind of satisfaction. It's quieter but deeper. It comes from knowing rather than being told. Satisfaction is stable because it's not dependent on reaction. You don't need applause to feel grounded. You have proof. Proof builds self-respect, which is far more motivating than external praise. Announcements can also inflate ego prematurely. You start identifying with the outcome before you've earned it. That inflation can make the work feel beneath you. Results keep ego in check because they require humility. You can't fake them. You can't rush them. You have to meet the work where it is. Another subtle effect is how results change relationships. When you announce plans, people may try to advise caution or redirect you. When you produce results, the dynamic shifts. Conversations become more respectful. Input becomes more thoughtful. Boundaries strengthen without needing to be asserted. Results also change how you see yourself. You move from imagining capability to experiencing it. That shift alters decision making. You become less reactive and more deliberate. You trust your ability to handle obstacles because you've already handled some. This trust creates momentum that announcements never sustain. The process of producing results forces clarity. Vague goals become specific through action. Assumptions are tested. Weak points are exposed. This information refines effort. Announcements skip this process. They keep everything abstract, which feels safe but leads nowhere. When you rely on results, patience increases. You stop expecting immediate validation because you're invested in long-term progress. Patience reduces anxiety and increases endurance. Endurance allows consistency. Consistency produces results. The cycle reinforces itself. Results also travel farther than words. They don't need translation. They don't depend on context. They are understood across environments. An announcement may impress in one room and be dismissed in another. A result holds value everywhere because it's real. Working quietly until something is done changes how you move through the world. You become less reactive, less performative, more grounded. Running through the park, your attention stays on the work instead of the response. Over time, this creates a reputation that isn't based on promises but on delivery. People learn to listen when you speak because you've already shown what you can do. Announcements ask for time and attention up front. Results earn attention after the fact. That order matters. It preserves dignity. It preserves focus. It preserves momentum. Results don't need amplification. They don't need repetition. They carry their own signal, and that signal cuts through noise because it's backed by effort, discipline, and follow through.